Before I stumbled into some research about history and specifically the way the calendar was put together, I had never thought that this could be questioned. So I knew there were different calendars used by different civilizations, but in some way everybody agreed. Maybe there was still the Islamic world and the Jewish world. They are using a very specific calendar I don't know much about, which is based on lunar cycles. The Hira, the Muslims are counting their years starting from the departure from the Prophet ﷺ from Mecca when he went to Medina.
So it's a Hijri calendar.
Yes, but it was not put together by the Prophet himself. It's many years after his death that there was a need to have a calendar. And so I don't know which Khalifa decided to choose the Hijra as the starting point of the calendar. But the fact is that today I find it very astonishing that we mostly all agree on that. So one of the calendar has taken over all the others.
Right. So
Right.
it's the most accepted calendar.
Accepted calendar. So
around the
where
world.
does it come from? Because when you look at history and what remains of the writings of the ancients, they were never dating their papers or their chronicles the way we do.
Yeah.
For example, there is a huge mythology about the big scare of the year 1000. We are explained that people reacted to the entering the year 1000 the way people reacted in entering the year 2000. And you remember maybe in 1999, it was a big fuss that we are going to cross the millennia. And you have these millenarist ideas that something is going to happen. because-
Y2K,
Yes.
everything's going to fall apart and technology is going to reset to zero.
Yes, and people were taking it as example the great scare of the year 1000.
Yeah.
But when you really look at this objectively, nobody knew at that time they were in the year 1000 because there was no unified calendar, even in the West. When you were living, for example, in Germany or in France and you were a monk writing some chronicles, you would date from the number of years in the reign of such and such king. For example, today we would say if we were in England, we would say we are in the first year of the reign of King Charles.
So then it would reset with every king.
Yes.
So then
but-
we'd go back to the first year of, say, King Charles IV or
Yes,
whatever the next
so-
king.
So
Okay.
when you look at chronicles, official documents, until the 16th century, they are all dated and I edict this as the king in the 23rd year of my reign. So someone must have worked in putting together all these chronologies and trying to figure out a unified chronology. And it is true. It is basically two monks in England in the 16th century. They worked very hard in collecting the maximum chronicles and reign information, what was happening in Hungary,
Yeah.
in everywhere, and they unified everything. And they made a chronology of the world from the time of the birth or the coming on earth of Adam
Really?
to their time, dating each event
Yeah.
to its precise year and month. So in their chronology, you can find that the flood happened in that year and that month. And the birth of Sayyidina
But
Ayub,
how are they sure about the dates
Well,
and the chronology?
that's the thing. We know now that most of it is made up
Yeah.
to the best of their ability. But really to determine the date of birth of Sayyidina Ibrahim
Right.
to the months,
Would be impossible at this point.
of course, but they did it. And what we did, we adopted their calendar. We forgot the beginning, everything which is very close to the beginning of history. History being defined the period when writing began. And we just kept their chronology of the past 2000 years
Who decided that and why? Why did everybody agree?
because it was convenient, because we had nothing else.
But I suppose the might was right. Whoever was the leading power would say, okay, we're going to go by this calendar. And if you want to do business with us, this is how we do it. And
Yes, but it's
no
very-
one had a choice.
It is very convenient
Yeah.
to have a common calendar, what we call the common era.
Yeah, sure.
But it is strange that it begins in the year zero, that is supposedly defined by the birth of Jesus, when we know from the New Testament that Jesus was born in the summer. All right, and his birth is set on the 25th of December, which is a date that has no real astronomical signification, but is very much aligned to some previous beliefs that existed around the Mediterranean, especially regarding another religion around a god called Mithra that was very popular at the time. So it seems that it's an effort from the church to take the birth date of Mithra and assign it to Jesus so that people who are following the Mithraic religion would adopt Christianity more easily. They did the same with the Virgin Mary, giving her the title of Mother of God, because there was a huge cult of the mother, the goddess mother, in the Mediterranean again. So if you could give to Mary some characteristics of this mother goddess, then people would transition more easily and they would find the same elements in this new religion they adopt than the one they came from. The same happened in Europe, where the church, and the Catholic Church in particular, adopted a lot of customs. They were pagan, like the Christmas tree and all these things.
All pagan practices,
Yes, but it's a way to appease the tensions. When you want people to adopt your religion, you include in your religion some elements that are not originally there, but they would reassure the newcomers.
And I had read a long time ago that whatever debauchery that was attached to such celebrations was moved to January 1st, which would then be New Year's. So New Year's Eve was the day you celebrated in a more sort of crazy manner, and then Christmas would be the way that you celebrate in a more religious type manner or family style manner.
The calendar, the beginning of the calendar, January 1st, has no meaning astronomically. It's totally disconnected from any movement of nature, which is very strange. But what you are referring to is the Saturnales. It was a festival in Rome, where one day out of each year, the servants would take on the position of their masters. And it's like a festival, a carnival. Okay, of course, during this day, they're supposedly having the rights of the masters. They would not abuse those rights because the next day they would be slaves again. But this is the idea of carnival. New Year's Eve is something really new, I think.
Yeah, and the calendar doesn't make sense in the way the months are named because September, the word sept is 7, October is 8,
yes.
Yet September is the 9th month and October is the 10th month. So that also doesn't comport.
Yes, it's a big mess.
Why?
I don't know, because in each language you should really study the naming of the months. Months, yeah. But more interestingly is that when these two monks put together all these chronicles and put them in order to come up with a unified chronology, I was very interested by the work of people in Germany and in Russia, where they totally put into question the work of these two monks, saying that they committed huge errors. So this is very controversial. It's called the new chronology. In my opinion, convincingly, they point out problems, meaning that you have entire periods that are duplicated, meaning that if you have a chronic in Hungary that says it's the 7th year of this king, and the king being named the Brave, okay? Another monastery, even in Hungary, would say it is the 7th year of the reign of the king, and they call it not the Brave, because it's a surname. They call him the Courageous, but it's the same guy.
So that just adds to the confusion.
So the two monks, they would think they're two different kings. And instead of having one period of 7 years, you would have 7 years of reign of the Courageous, followed by 7 years of the Bold. But it's the same. So there's duplications within the chronology. And some people, it's the head of the Russian Academy of Science, Fomenko, who started this work. He tried to map each historical events with some, what we call today, metadata, and found many duplications. Now he's a very profound Russian nationalist and wants to exaggerate probably the role of Russia in the history of the world. So he gives Russia a prominent role, and everything's coming from Russia. I don't know if you saw the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding.
Yes.
Everything's coming from Greece. For him, everything's coming from Russia. So it's a bit extreme. But he's asking...
very proud.
Yes,
Russian
but
pride.
he's asking good questions. Because when you see that, if you take the popes, official popes, you have many popes that followed each other in the history of the Catholic Church. Okay, the current pope is the follower of a previous one, etc. It's starting from Peter. If you take this chronology of popes, each pope reigned, because they are really emperors of the church, they reigned 7 years, 1 year, 2 years, 20 years, etc. Now, if you take from the Bible the chronology of the kings of Israel, the kingdom of Israel, and you map the first king of Israel and the second to the first pope, you find they each have the same number of years of reign.
Really?
Yeah, so Fomenko is thinking that the chronology is made up by these monks in order to reflect the Bible. But in fact, we have no certainty of what really happened. So we have an artificial series of names. This is one thing. Then German people and how, let's say, painfully attached to facts and precision
Very meticulous.
And they are not really attached to history and defending the history of Russia. But they looked at it and they really identified many problems. But one of the most interesting one, in my opinion, is called the 300 years phantom time. They put together good arguments saying that 300 years of our chronology is just invented, never existed. Through duplications, etc. And not only, and apparently some of them think that it is purposefully done. Because you had around the year 1000 emperor, you had the Holy Emperor of Germany, Roman Emperor, who was thinking of himself as the inheritor of the Roman Empire, but he was a German. And this Holy Empire existed until the 16th century. I had in my youth a friend who was a baron of the Germanic Holy Empire.
Okay.
So it's still today people carry some of these titles.
Very proudly so, I'm sure.
Yeah, he was proud of it. So this Otton guy, he wanted to legitimize himself. And in order to legitimize himself, he needed to give himself a background and the idea to people that he was coming from an already existing very powerful family of emperors. And so these German historians say that he made up these 300 years as being the Carolingian period, the period where Charlemagne existed.
Yeah.
This fantastic figure who created school, who converted all Europe to Christianity. He did so many things, or so many things are ascribed to him, that you probably need 3 or 4 lifetimes to do all of this. But
and a lot of them are problematic. The school system of today and a lot of the systems
all of this
that are ascribed to him are not exactly the most excellent.
Yes, he has always a very favorable side of him, but other historians are really criticizing him as being an intolerant religious fanatic. Who would kill systematically. You had to convert under Charlemagne. Even official history tells you that you had to become Christian, otherwise you died.
Wow.
This is the religion of love. But the very interesting point, these 300 years, for a long time, I've been puzzled by it. Because historians point that from the year 650 in our chronology until 1000, you have a big lack in historic artifacts and constructions and architecture. It's like history has not moved at all. So there's something strange happening there, where at the same time is the end of the Byzantium Empire that fell to not the Byzantium Empire, the Roman Empire, the barbarians coming over and destroying the Roman Empire. But it's also exactly the period where the Quran arrives.
Interesting.
But the main argument for me, for taking this seriously, it was the calendar itself. Because Julius Caesar saw the problem of calendar. He wanted to unify the Roman Empire around a single calendar.
Yeah.
So what he did is, around the year minus 30 years, he introduced a calendar, the Julian calendar, Julius Caesar, Julian calendar, saying that each year is 365 days, and there is every 4 years, 1 day added to keep in sync.
Okay.
So it makes a year of 365, 25, and a fourth. Except this is not really exact, because the real time of a year, when the Earth goes around the Sun, it's 11 minutes less than this. So if you go 1,000 years adding artificially 11 minutes, you will add days.
Yes.
Okay. So now it's easy. If you add artificially 11 minutes to your calendar, you will find that for the church it was important that Easter falls into the equinox of around March 21. But over time, Easter was, instead of being March 21, was the beginning of April. So it was a problem because now you had the celebration of Easter was not coinciding with the astronomical event. So in 1583, there's a pope in Rome, Gregory, who said, okay, first we have to correct the additional days that do not exist.
Yeah.
Come back to an alignment to the astronomy. And then we are going to change the calendar again, and we are going to define new rules, which is that it's 365 days, plus every 4 days there's 1 additional day.
Every 4 years,
But except in the years that finish with 0, in this case, we don't add it. And so it keeps in sync more. And these 11 minutes...
And he worked this out by some sort of a formula, that this is how it would balance. Okay.
But then... how many days did they have to correct? If you make a very easy calculation, since the introduction of the Julian calendar until 1583, the number of years that passed would have made 11 minutes each year, would have made up 13 days. 13 days of discrepancy between the equinox and the date we are in. But they corrected only 10 days.
Okay.
So there's an accumulation equivalent to 3 days that didn't have to be corrected. So it means that, 3 days, let's say 11 minutes a year, you need, for 1 day, you need 128 days. So 3 days, it's equivalent to about 300 years that we calculate do not exist. So I was puzzled for this.
That is puzzling. And one question, did they never reference the Quran about the lunar calendar that the Muslims go by? Was that not taken into account at all when they were trying to work this out?
No, because there was no bearing into their calculation. It is really based on the movement
No,
of the
but
sun, the year.
you would think that you would want to look at all the systems and really come up with the most perfect system by your calculations.
Yeah, but the system is a system of measure, and it's not that it's not perfect, it's just it's not exact.
Okay, so coming back to this, now what?
So now it's amusing because I was passionate about this.
Yeah.
This is the proof, yeah? If you should have 13 days to correct, but you only had 10 days, it means that 300 years less. So we don't live in 2022. We live in 1722. Until I got this information that people were aware of this problem already in the Council of Nicaea.
Yeah.
That happened in the year 325, and they already corrected 3 days then.
Did they?
Yeah, so it means that it's normal that there were only 10 days more to correct. So we are good. But
we're good as in we are in the right date?
Yes, I think that the number of years passed since the introduction of the Julian calendar is correct.
Okay.
Okay, but it's just to show you that they're very interesting things, but if you don't have the full information, you can become very interested in a question that has no bearing. And it's very convincing because indeed, the 300 years at the end of the Roman Empire, around the year 600 to the year 1900, there's 300 years that are very opaque. There are 300 years that we don't know very much about.
Yeah.
Okay? And it happens to be exactly when the Quran came. I don't know. This is an evolving story.
Very interesting story.
And there's many interest also I had about how do we know? We go to China and they have their calendar.
Yeah.
We go to Egypt and we reconstructed their calendar. How do we coincide our calendar and their calendar? How do we know if, for example, they have Ramses, the pharaoh, that lived in such time in their calendar? How do we know it corresponds to such time in our calendar?
We don't, do we?
Well,
because they're so disjointed that no one factored in other calendars in order to make their calendars.
Yes.
So there's no real link.
So there's a real science in adjusting calendars against each other. And one of the most fascinating examples we had recently was the 2012.
Okay.
2012 was for the esoteric people and people who are trying to an alternative view to the world. It was the Maya calendar scare. Because when we went to America, we found traces of the Mayan calendar. And when we put it together, and they were not using numbers, they were doing nodes in chords, etc. But people have been working very hard, and they adjusted the Maya calendar to our calendar. But the Maya, they stopped that calendar at one moment. And they said, we stop it because it's the end of the world. When people took our calendar, matched the Maya calendar, the end of the world corresponded to our year 2012.
I remember this.
Yeah.
I remember
so people
2012.
freaked out.
Yes.
It was the end of the world.
Yes.
I find it very interesting that in fact there was an error in adjustment.
Yeah.
And how do we know that? But since then people have been doing diligently very interesting work. For example, in their calendar, they noted there was such and such eclipse. So you can reconstruct with computer and calculation that at that time, at that moment, you could see an eclipse of the moon, and the same year, 2 eclipses of the sun and 1 of the moon, and the next year, 1 of the moon, etc. So you can reconstruct the exact year. So now you can have a more realistic alignment. And it happens that when you do a correct alignment of the two calendars, the end of the world, of the Maya, happens in the year, I think, 1520, 1530, which is exactly when their civilization was totally destroyed by the Spaniards.
So it was the end of the world for them.
It was their end of the world.
How interesting. But coming back to this alignment of calendars and the different calendars, so since you have looked into it and you've studied it, what is your opinion of the lunar calendar that the Muslims go by? How valid is it, and should it be instead of the current calendar that we use?
No, I think we got a hint in the Quran by Allah that Allah is above all of this. There is no more truth in the solar calendar and the lunar calendar. It's a matter of convenience. You can use solar calendar for crops and cropping and things like that, but also the solar calendar has its usefulness. And Allah makes it very clear that He's using both. And we have this very clear hint in the story of the people of the cave.
Right.
When Allah says, and they stayed there in the cave 300 years, to which you can add 9. It happens that 300 solar years is equal to 309 lunar years.
Remarkable.
Yes.
So it's referencing both the calendars, the solar and the lunar calendar. However, the lunar calendar could be a little bit more accurate, one could argue, because then the months are properly counted because of the moon, right? When a month has come to a completion. So you don't need to bother with this, adding the extra day and whatnot. The months actually carry themselves.
Yeah, but there's a matter of convenience to stick to a solar calendar for the seasons, etc. Because if you use a lunar calendar, you will have a Ramadan, for example, that goes into the winter, into the summer, etc. So why not use simply both? Because Allah says the movements of the planets and the stars, they follow calculations. So there is not one that is more true than the other. Everything is true and according to His will.
Sure.
And they are guidance. So let's use one or the other according to what is needed.
But you can agree that the Muslims are using both, aren't they? Because they're setting their religious timings and calendar to that lunar calendar, the Islamic calendar. And of course, they're doing business by the Roman calendar. So they are adjusting their lives to both calendars.
Each one have their purpose.
Yeah. And we shouldn't lose sight of either one of them and the importance of them.
And not say that one is wrong and the other. All of these movements and these chronological hints are given to us by Allah so that we can reflect on it and use it properly.